So, in order to start and then for Azra to begin her presentation and get over the agony quickly, let's make a go. And if anyone comes in, that's no problem. So let me just briefly summarize where we're up to. And then we'll move straight into Azra's presentation, a more general perspective. We've been looking primarily so far at the kind of political side, dynastic side of the Normans proper. So in terms of properly being Normans, we have William I, his son William Rufus, and I haven't said anything about him yet, but Henry I, and sometimes William's grandson Stephen, through his daughter, is counted as a Norman, though obviously his father was not. But we will deal with him next week as a sort of introduction to the Angevins, which is when we deal with Henry II. Today we'll talk more generally about Norman England under these early kings, and Azra will talk about literature and language, but also a lot about the church, I think. I'll say a bit about the organisation of government under the Normans, and I'll say a bit about Henry I's reign as well. And then I hope we'll have time to discuss Domesday Book, which again, I hope at least some of you have had time to look at since Tuesday. Okay, as I said, not the most exciting reading, but in fact, if you are a medieval historian, extremely exciting document. But that perhaps reflects badly on the rest of us rather than on you. Okay, so let me just finish off, since I've been last time talking about our map and so on. Let me just finish off this class this hour by looking at Henry I, and then I'll look a bit about kind of administration and government in the next hour before we go into some detail with the Domesday Book. So if you remember, August the year 1100, William Rufus killed in some kind of an accident in the New Forest while hunting, and amongst the group of people that were involved in the hunting party at that time was his younger brother Henry, but he was not actually there allegedly when William was killed, and whether William was killed deliberately or by accident we'll never know, as I said, but he dies. Okay, so the king has been killed. He had, I think, made some arrangements with Robert that they would kind of follow each other. He didn't have a son to succeed him alive at that time, but Robert was where? Where was Robert at this point?
Normandy, but then he went on the crusade.
He was on the crusade, so he'd kind of temporarily given Normandy to William, and they'd more or less made an arrangement. If I die, you get everything, and if I die, you get everything. And particularly while I'm on crusade, you can control Normandy, and I'll get it back when I come back, as long as you give me some money to help me with the crusade. All the things I was saying the other day. But unfortunately, when William is killed, for whatever reason, Robert is conveniently not around to press his claim. Okay, so Henry does the most important thing, is he goes to Winchester, which I shall mention, I think, again later on. And that's not very clear at all, is it, unfortunately?
Did Robert die in the crusade?
No, he comes back. I'll tell you about him now. Okay, so Winchester, you can't even see it's down here, but Winchester is where they had, at that time, they held the treasury. Okay. Which means the king's wealth, the vast part of the king's wealth, which he couldn't kind of carry around with him all the time and things like that. So the man who controls the treasury controls the kingdom, ultimately, okay, because he's got the money to pay people and so on. So Henry does a runner to Winchester, and gets hold of the treasury on the news of the king's death, and is therefore able to press his case to be the new king, ignoring whatever arrangements his two older brothers had or had not made before. Okay, he gets the support of the nobility, because you need the support of the aristocracy, and this is primarily Norman, but there's still some influential English people around, by a number of ways. Primarily, when he is eventually crowned, he issues what's called a Charter of Liberties, which promises to kind of correct some of the abuses which his brother William had made during his reign, to sort of make things better with the church and especially with the Norman magnates, with the leaders and so on. And he very, very quickly arranges to marry a young lady called Edith, who was the daughter of Malcolm Canmore, King of Scotland. And what's the significance? I've mentioned this guy once before, Malcolm, King of Scotland. What's the significance for us for him, as well as the fact that he's just a king? Remember who he's married to? To whom?
Trace his lineage.
No, I thought you were going in the right direction there, but you just kind of swerved off at the end of that sentence or something. He was married to Margaret, who was she? Yes, she's the sister of Edgar Atheling, the last surviving male claimant or whatever, descendant of Ethelred the Unready. Okay, and their daughter is Edith. Okay. So, by marrying her, he connects himself very slightly to the older English line, okay? But as I said, his daughter's got slightly less pure Anglo-Saxon blood than the Scots, because it was a generation later, but they squeezed that in. And then, at some point, she changes her name from Edith, a good English name here, Anglo-Saxon name, to Matilda, which is a very popular Norman name, partly perhaps as an attempt to keep the Normans happy, okay, because they're not happy with this English element. So, Charter of Liberties, the marriage to Edith, all these things and other ways to get support for his claim to be king. And then he is eventually crowned king, okay, even though probably there was an arrangement between his brothers of some sort or another. In the following year, Robert is back, and no doubt has already heard of what's been going on, and he tries to invade England to remove his young brother, who in his mind shouldn't be there, but he fails to succeed in this military expedition, and they come to some kind of an arrangement. Okay. Then, a few years later, the tables are turned, and Henry himself, having built up his support and so on in England, invades Normandy, defeats his brother in battle in September 1106, which is about 40 years after their father invaded England, as is often quoted. And he wins and captures Robert, and Robert remains a prisoner, imprisoned by his younger brother until he dies himself in 1134. So a guy who was was Duke of Normandy and could have become King of England ends up being a prisoner and having no more significant effect on English history. So that's Robert Curthose out of the picture. Henry, through his sort of distantly English wife, with all sorts of interesting blood on the way, has 2 children. He has a son called William, using obviously a very good Norman name to press his situation, sometimes called Adeling, which is a form of the English Atheling. But William dies before his father. He's killed in a boat accident, so to speak. And when Henry dies in 1135, he has no son to succeed him. He marries again, but doesn't have a son by his second wife. He had lots of illegitimate children. He's quite famous for whatever he does, sleeping around or something like that. He had a lot of fun in his time, but he had no legitimate... sorry? Right, whatever, yes, it goes with the name or something. But unfortunately for him, or for English history for the next few decades, he didn't have a legitimate son by one of his two wives who could replace him because his son had died. So he names his daughter Matilda, later nicknamed the Empress, as his heir, which was a strange move because you don't normally obviously name ladies as heirs. When he dies, however, we see his nephew Stephen pressing his claim, and so next week we'll follow the story of the emergence of the Angevins and the anarchy under Stephen I, things like that. Henry's reign is very important for the kind of consolidation of the organisation of Norman and Angevin England, and many of the things, I think I've said this before, many of the features of particularly government which we associate with Henry II and later probably owe their origins, at least in part, to Henry I's reign, but we have less evidence for them, and I'll talk a little bit about those things after the break. Okay, any questions? Okay, thank you again, Azra, for your presentation. Let's have a break then. Just finish a few minutes early. We can start. We'll look again at a bit more detail at government under the Normans, and then we'll discuss Domesday Book.